Dr. Ethan Cross had been serving as cultural liaison to Queen Isaveth's court for 8 months, a position that sounded impressive in official documentation, but amounted to being a living reference manual that Thessari officials consulted when they needed human perspectives on diplomatic matters. The role was important, certainly. Earth's relationship with the Thessari Empire was still relatively new, only 5 years since first contact, 3 years since the formal alliance. Having someone who understood both cultures and could facilitate communication was genuinely valuable. But it was also isolating in ways Ethan hadn't fully anticipated when he'd accepted the posting. He attended nearly every major court function. He observed high-level diplomatic negotiations. He was present for policy discussions that shaped how the Thessari Empire approached relations with humanity and other species. But he was present as observer and consultant, not participant. He stood at the margins, offered input when requested, provided cultural context when asked. He didn't vote on decisions, didn't shape policy directly, didn't truly belong to the inner circles where actual power resided. The Thessari were an ancient empire with social hierarchies so complex that Ethan was still learning nuances after 8 months of immersion. They had elaborate protocols governing everything from how you address someone based on their house affiliation to what colors you wore to formal events based on your relationship to the host. They also had elongated ears that could detect frequencies beyond human range and skin that shifted through colors, communicating emotions and status with precision that made human body language look primitive by comparison. Queen Isaveth had been courteous, even kind, in their interactions. She asked thoughtful questions about human customs, listened carefully to his explanations, occasionally incorporated his suggestions into how Thessari diplomats approached negotiations with Earth. But their relationship was professional. Formal, bounded by the clear hierarchical distance between a sovereign ruler of an 8,000-year-old empire and a human consultant from a species that had only recently developed interstellar capability. Or at least, that's what Ethan had thought their relationship was. Until tonight. The grand reception celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Thessari-human alliance was being held in the Crystal Hall, a space so named because its walls were literally grown from living crystal that shifted colors in response to ambient sound and light. The hall was packed with Thessari nobility, human diplomats, representatives from half a dozen other species, all mingling in the carefully choreographed social dance that formal diplomatic events required. Ethan was doing his usual job, circulating among the groups, facilitating conversations when cultural misunderstandings threatened, explaining Thessari customs to confused human guests and human behaviors to puzzled Thessari observers. He was good at this. 8 months of constant immersion had given him fluency in both the formal and informal aspects of Thessari court culture. He could read skin colors with reasonable accuracy, understand the significance of different ear positions, navigate the complex web of status and protocol that governed every interaction. He was currently helping Ambassador Williams understand why a particular Thessari noble's shade of blue indicated thoughtful consideration, rather than the sadness humans might associate with that color. When he felt the room's energy shift, conversations didn't stop exactly, but they changed, volume dropping slightly, attention shifting toward the center of the hall where Queen Isaveth stood surrounded by her inner circle of advisors. Ethan glanced over, trying to determine what had changed. The Queen was looking directly at him, not a casual glance across a crowded room. Direct, sustained attention that locked onto him despite the distance and the dozens of people between them. Their eyes met. She made a small gesture, unmistakable despite the crowd, beckoning him to approach. "Excuse me, Ambassador," Ethan said, already moving. "The Queen seems to require my presence." This wasn't unusual. She occasionally summoned him during events to ask questions or make introductions when human cultural expertise was needed. Ethan made his way through the crowd, offering polite nods to people he passed, navigating the complex social geography of who stood where based on status and affiliation. He reached the Queen's circle, the inner sanctum of advisors and highest-ranking nobles who had constant access to her attention, and stopped at the appropriate respectful distance. "Your Majesty," he said, executing the formal half-bow that protocol required. "How may I be of service?" Queen Isaveth looked at him for a long moment, her skin shifting through colors that Ethan couldn't quite interpret. Not the standard shades he'd learned to recognize, but something more complex. Then she did something completely unexpected. She reached out and took his hand. Not a formal handshake, not a ceremonial gesture, just a gentle, deliberate grasp of his hand in hers. And she drew him close. Close enough that he was standing within her immediate personal space rather than at the respectful distance that protocol normally required between monarch and consultant. Close enough that he was positioned within the intimate circle of advisors rather than outside it. The conversations around them died mid-sentence. The court went silent in expanding ripples as people noticed what had just happened, turned to look, and stopped talking to watch. Within seconds, the entire crystal hall had gone quiet, 300 people staring at the queen and the human she'd just drawn close to her side. Ethan stood frozen, his hand still in hers, completely uncertain what this meant or how he was supposed to respond. The queen's skin had shifted to colors that were causing visible reactions from every Thessari watching, shock white from some, speculative blue from others, calculating gold from the political operators who were already trying to determine implications. "Your Majesty," one of the senior advisors said very carefully, his skin showing confused purple, "is there? Do you require the cultural liaison for some immediate matter?" "No," Queen Isaveth replied, her voice carrying clearly in the absolute silence of the hall. "I simply wanted him here, beside me." The silence somehow deepened. Because apparently those words meant something significant that Ethan didn't understand, but that every Thessari in the room recognized immediately. Ethan could feel hundreds of eyes on them, human, Thessari, and several other species, all watching with varying degrees of shock, curiosity, or calculation. The queen was still holding his hand. Not tightly, not possessively, just holding it, keeping him anchored at her side rather than at the respectful distance protocol normally required. "Your Majesty," another advisor ventured, his voice very cautious, "forgive the inquiry, but the court will naturally seek to understand the significance of this gesture. Are you declaring?" He trailed off, apparently unable or unwilling to finish the question. "I am choosing proximity," Queen Isaveth said clearly, her words carrying across the silent hall. "I am acknowledging a bond that has developed over months of conversation and counsel. I am making public what has been private, that this human has become important to me in ways that extend beyond his official role as cultural liaison." Ethan's mind was racing, trying to process what he was hearing while also acutely aware that this conversation was happening in front of the entire diplomatic corps of both their species plus representatives from half a dozen others. Bond, important beyond his role, he'd thought they had a professional relationship. Formal, yes, cordial, certainly, but bounded by the clear hierarchical distance between a sovereign ruler and a foreign consultant. Apparently the queen had been experiencing something quite different, and apparently she just announced it to her entire court. "Ethan," she said, speaking to him directly now, her skin settling into warm gold that he'd learned meant deep contentment or satisfaction, "I apologize for the abruptness of this, but there are those in my court who have been questioning your continued presence and influence, who suggest that a human consultant should not have the access or the attention I have been granting you these past months." She paused, her grip on his hand firm but gentle. "I decided it was time to make clear that your presence at court is not merely professional courtesy to our human allies. It is my deliberate choice, based on regard and trust that you have earned through your counsel, your honesty, and your character." The advisors around them were showing various skin colors, resigned blue from some, disapproving crimson from others, cautious gold from those trying to calculate political implications. "You may speak freely," the queen added, a slight smile touching her features. "I have rather dramatically put you in a position that requires some response." Ethan took a breath, trying to organize thoughts that had scattered the moment she'd taken his hand and drawn him close. "Your Majesty, I'm deeply honored by your regard. I value our conversations greatly. They've become one of the most meaningful aspects of my work here. But I need to confess I'm not entirely certain what's happening or what this gesture means to your court." Several of the Thessari advisors made sounds that might have been amusement or exasperation, hard to tell which. Physical proximity, chosen by the sovereign, is a public signal. One of the senior advisors explained, his voice carrying the resignation of someone who's accepted something he can't change. It indicates protection, favor, and... He paused, clearly choosing words carefully, potential intent of deeper personal bond, or confirmation of bond already formed. Another advisor added quietly. In Thessari culture, the first advisor continued, when a ruler draws someone close in public court, particularly someone who holds no formal rank or blood relationship, it is understood as declaration that the person stands under royal protection, that their counsel carries royal favor, that the sovereign is acknowledging personal regard that transcends professional relationship. Ethan looked at the queen, trying to read her expression. "Your Majesty, I don't want to presume." "Then allow me to be explicit," Isaveth interrupted gently. "I have drawn you close because I have come to value you not merely as advisor, but as companion. Because our conversations have become essential to me in ways that go beyond policy consultation. Because I trust your judgment and your character. And because I choose to make that trust and regard visible rather than maintaining the polite fiction that our relationship is purely professional." She released his hand but didn't step away, maintaining the close proximity. "Over the past months, our discussions have evolved from formal consultations about cultural matters to conversations about philosophy, governance, personal perspective. You have challenged my assumptions, offered viewpoints I would not hear from my own advisors, treated me as a person rather than merely a position." Her skin shifted to deeper gold. "That has been valuable beyond measure. You have become someone whose presence I seek not because protocol requires it, but because I enjoy your company. Because your insights matter to me. Because you have become important in ways I can no longer pretend are strictly professional." The court was still silent, hanging on every word of this unprecedented public declaration. "I am making this explicit," the Queen continued, "because there are factions within my court who would prefer to remove you from your position, who argue that a human should not have such access to the throne, such influence over my thinking. Rather than allow them to undermine your position through bureaucratic maneuvering, I am declaring publicly that you stand at my side by my deliberate choice, that you are under royal protection, that any who question your presence question my judgment." Ethan was trying to process the political implications while also grappling with the personal revelation. "Your Majesty, I'm honored, truly, but I need to understand what you're asking of me, what this position means. What expectations come with standing at your side rather than at respectful distance?" "It means you matter to me," Isaveth said simply. "It means I value your counsel and your company. It means I am acknowledging, publicly, that what has developed between us goes beyond the formal boundaries of your official role." She paused, her expression softening. "As for expectations, there are none beyond what you already provide. Your honest counsel, your willingness to challenge me when you believe I am wrong, your perspective that comes from outside the echo chamber of court politics. These are what I value. These are why I choose proximity." "You could have told me this privately," Ethan observed, "before making public declaration." "I could have," the Queen agreed, "but that would have left you vulnerable to those who oppose your influence. By making this declaration publicly, I place you under royal..." Ethan looked around at the assembled court, at the shocked faces of the human diplomatic delegation, at the calculating expressions of various Thessari political factions, at the hundreds of witnesses to this moment. "This will complicate things," he said quietly. "Politically, diplomatically, a Thessari queen publicly acknowledging personal regard for a human consultant, that's going to have implications we can't fully predict." "It will," Isaveth agreed, "but less complication than the alternative. Less damage than pretending you are merely consultant when you have become confidant. Less dishonesty than allowing political factions to force separation based on your species rather than your merit and character." She looked out at the court, her voice carrying authority that silenced any murmuring that had started. "Let it be known throughout this empire, Dr. Ethan Cross stands at my side by my deliberate choice. He has earned this position through months of wise counsel, honest discourse, and unwavering integrity. Any who question his presence or his influence question my judgment. Any who attempt to undermine his position undermine me directly. It was a declaration that made several nobles' skin flash angry crimson, but no one spoke against it, because challenging a sovereign's public declaration, especially one made this explicitly, was dangerous political territory that even the most ambitious factions wouldn't enter lightly. The reception resumed eventually, though the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Ethan remained at the Queen's side, still processing what had happened and what it meant. People approached them with careful formality, recalibrating how they interacted with Ethan now that he'd been publicly elevated from consultant to, whatever this was, companion, confidant, someone the Queen had drawn close and refused to distance. The human delegation looked torn between congratulating him and being deeply concerned about the diplomatic implications. Ambassador Williams pulled him aside at one point, speaking quietly. "Ethan, I need to ask, did you know she was going to do this?" "No," Ethan replied honestly. "I had no idea. I thought we had a professional relationship. Formal, cordial, but professional." "Well, it's not professional anymore," Williams observed. "The entire court just watched her claim you publicly. That's going to change everything, your position, your authority, how people interact with you. Are you prepared for that?" "I don't think I had much choice in the matter," Ethan said. "She made the declaration. I can't exactly refuse it without humiliating her publicly, which would be catastrophic diplomatically." "Is that the only reason you're not refusing?" Williams asked shrewdly. "Or do you share the regard she just acknowledged?" Ethan hesitated, then admitted, "I've been very carefully not examining my own feelings because they seemed inappropriate given our positions. But if I'm honest, yes, I've developed regard that goes well beyond consultant appreciating sovereign's courtesy. I just didn't think she saw me as anything other than the useful human who answers cultural questions. She clearly sees you as considerably more than that," Williams observed. "The question is what you're going to do about it." Later that evening, after the reception concluded, Queen Isaveth requested private audience with Ethan in her personal chambers, rooms he'd never been invited to before, their meetings always held in formal consultation spaces. The chambers were less imposing than the public spaces, still elegant, still obviously royal, but with touches of personality that the formal rooms lacked. Books in multiple languages, art from various cultures, comfortable seating arranged for conversation rather than ceremony. "You're wondering why I did that so publicly," Isaveth said as soon as they were alone. "I could have spoken to you privately first, could have asked your permission before making declaration in front of 300 witnesses." "The thought had crossed my mind," Ethan admitted. "Though I understand you were making political statement as much as personal one." "I was making both," Isaveth confirmed. She settled into one of the comfortable chairs and gestured for Ethan to do the same, an informality that emphasized the private nature of this conversation. "There have been increasing pressures to remove you from court," she explained. "Suggestions from certain factions that a human has too much access to the throne, too much influence over my thinking. Traditional nobles who believe I should rely solely on Thessari advisors rather than seeking outside perspectives." Her skin shifted to frustrated purple. "I could have resisted those pressures quietly, could have maintained your position through bureaucratic maneuvering and political favors. But that would have left you vulnerable to subtle undermining, changes to your access, restrictions on which meetings you could attend, gradual erosion of your influence. So you made a public declaration that makes removing me politically difficult," Ethan said. "I made a public declaration that places you under royal protection," Isaveth corrected. "That makes explicit what I have been feeling privately, that you have become important to me beyond your official role, that I value your presence for personal reasons as much as professional ones." She looked at him seriously. "I did not ask your permission first because I wanted you to understand that this is my choice, my declaration. You are not responsible for navigating the political implications. I am. You are protected by my position and my explicit favor. What I am asking now is whether you share the regard I have acknowledged, or whether you would prefer to maintain professional distance." Ethan thought about 8 months of conversations that had become increasingly personal, about discussions that had evolved from how would humans interpret this policy to genuine exchanges about philosophy, leadership, the isolations of power, the challenges of bridging cultures. About the way he'd started looking forward to their consultations, not just as professional duty, but as genuine connection. About feelings he'd been carefully not examining because they seemed impossible given their positions. "I share it," he said. "I've been telling myself it was just professional appreciation because anything else seemed inappropriate. But if I'm honest, yes, I've developed regard for you that goes well beyond consultant valuing sovereign's courtesy or kindness. I value our conversations as personal connection, not just professional exchange." Isaveth's skin shifted to warm gold. "Then the declaration stands. You remain at my side by mutual choice rather than my unilateral decision. The court will adjust. The political factions will maneuver and calculate. But the fundamental truth remains unchanged. I drew you close because you matter to me. That truth is now public and protected." "What happens next?" Ethan asked. "Practically, how does this change things?" "Your official role will be redefined," Isaveth replied. "From cultural liaison to personal advisor to the throne, your council will carry explicit royal backing. You'll have access to information and decision-making processes that were previously restricted. You'll also have protection that makes you effectively untouchable by court factions." She paused. "You'll also be subject to considerably more scrutiny and speculation. There will be those who assume this is purely political maneuvering. Others who will speculate about romantic intent. Some who will resent your influence regardless of how it's characterized. You should be prepared for that attention." "As long as you're prepared for the implications on your end," Ethan said. "A Thessari queen drawing a human close, acknowledging personal regard publicly, that's unprecedented. There will be factions that oppose this on principle." "Let them oppose," Isaveth replied. "I have been queen for 43 years. I have navigated far more dangerous political waters than disapproval over my choice of companions. And I refuse to pretend that someone who has become important to me is merely professional convenience, because acknowledging the truth makes certain nobles uncomfortable." The weeks following the public declaration were exactly as complicated as Ethan had anticipated. His role was formally redefined as personal advisor to the throne, a position that carried considerably more authority than cultural liaison and made explicit what the Queen had declared. He was there by royal choice and favor. Various political factions responded predictably. Some accepted the new reality with pragmatic calculation, adjusting their approaches to account for Ethan's elevated status. Others opposed it on principle, arguing that a human shouldn't have such influence regardless of the Queen's personal regard. The human diplomatic corps was cautiously supportive, recognizing that having someone with genuine influence at the Thessari throne served Earth's interests even if the circumstances were unconventional. Through it all, Ethan and Isaveth continued their conversations, no longer pretending they were merely professional consultations, now openly acknowledging the personal connection that had developed. 3 months after the reception, during a private evening in the Queen's chambers, Isaveth asked the question that had been implicitly present since she'd drawn him close. "Do you regret that I made this public? That I forced your hand by declaring regard before asking if you shared it?" "I don't regret it," Ethan said honestly. "Though I wish I'd recognized my own feelings earlier so I could have been prepared when you announced yours. I spent months thinking you saw me as the useful human consultant, not realizing you were developing personal regard." "I was subtle about it," Isaveth admitted. "Deliberately so, because I wasn't certain you would welcome such regard from someone in my position. It seemed safer to maintain professional pretense while privately acknowledging my feelings. Until political pressure forced your hand," Ethan observed. "Until I decided that protecting you and our connection mattered more than maintaining comfortable pretense," Isaveth corrected. "The political pressure was the catalyst, yes, but the declaration itself was choice. I could have protected your position through other means. I chose public acknowledgement because I was tired of pretending." She shifted position to face him more directly. "In Thessari culture, the gesture I made, reaching out and drawing you close in public court, carries specific meaning. It signals that I claim you as important to me, that I place you under my protection, that I am acknowledging bond that goes beyond formal hierarchy." "I've learned that," Ethan said. "The various advisors have been quite explicit about the significance. What they may not have explained," Isaveth continued, "is that such gestures are rare precisely because they create obligations. Once I draw someone close publicly, I cannot easily distance them without signaling that I made error in judgment. The court interprets such proximity as my declaration of the person's worth and importance. To reverse that declaration would undermine my credibility and authority. So you're committed to keeping me at your side whether you want to or not?" Ethan asked. "I'm committed to keeping you at my side because I want to," Isaveth replied. "The political reality simply reinforces what is already my preference. I drew you close because you matter to me. That hasn't changed. If anything, the past months have confirmed my judgment. Your counsel has been invaluable, your presence has been essential, and my regard has only deepened." Ethan considered this. "You know there will always be those who oppose my presence, who see me as inappropriate influence or foreign corruption of Thessari tradition. Let them oppose," Isaveth said. "I am not their servant. I am their queen. I choose my advisors and companions based on merit and compatibility, not on what makes court factions comfortable. You have earned your position through competence and character. That is sufficient justification, regardless of your species." Years later, when Ethan's position had been thoroughly institutionalized, when his counsel had proven valuable enough that even initially skeptical factions acknowledged his worth, when the precedent of a human advisor standing at the Thessari queen's side had been normalized through time and results, he would reflect on the night everything changed. The night Queen Isaveth reached out in a crowded court and drew him close. The night conversation died and 300 people watched a sovereign make a choice that redefined everything. She could have been subtle, could have elevated him through official channels and bureaucratic mechanisms, could have maintained professional pretense while privately acknowledging personal regard. Instead, she chose public gesture, reaching out, drawing him close, making visible what had been developing invisibly over months of conversations and growing connection. Because power could be expressed through intimacy as much as through command. Because being chosen openly, without explanation or justification, carried more weight than any title spoken through formal decree. The queen had drawn him close. The court had stopped and watched. And in that gesture, everything changed, not because she demanded it, but because she chose it. With the quiet significance that came from a sovereign who knew exactly what she was doing and exactly why she was doing it. Ethan had been a consultant standing at the margins, offering advice when requested, maintaining respectful distance because protocol required it. She reached out and drew him to her side. And in that simple, deliberate motion, he became someone of genuine consequence, not through official appointment or bureaucratic elevation, but through the much more powerful statement of a ruler's personal choice, made public for all to witness and none to question without challenging the throne itself. The queen reached out. Ethan stepped close. The court fell silent. And from that silence, a new understanding, that sometimes the most powerful declarations are the ones made through gesture rather than words, through intimacy rather than command, through the simple act of drawing someone close and refusing to let political pressure force distance. She chose him, publicly, deliberately, without apology or explanation. Just reached out and drew him close and made clear through that single gesture that he mattered, to her, to the court, to the empire. That was enough. That was everything. The gesture that changed position and perception. The proximity that signaled protection and favor and possibility. The moment when a queen's choice transformed a consultant into a confidant through the simple act of reaching out and refusing to let go. That was the story, that was the truth, and it would be remembered. The night the queen drew a human close and the court fell